How he's going today?
G'day,
Good,
Nick.
Nick.
How
How
are
are
you,
you?
mate?
I am very good. I'm really good because it's very rare that my love of sport and movie reviewing and interviewing actually get to coincide with each other. So I'm very pumped to chat to you today. And I want to say, first of all, it's impossible to watch cricket for me now without actually going like, that's going to make the test. Like when I see a moment now, I go, that's probably going to make the documentary. But it's 3 seasons in now, and I'm curious to know. You've set a fantastic foundation of having exhilarating cricket, getting the dynamic between the players, but also helping us as fans understand who they are. What were those conversations like coming into the third season about finding new avenues for the show, or was it just about building up on those blocks that you've already set?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really interesting one. It's a question you always have to put to yourself. Like, what are we doing here that we haven't done before? And I think we approach it with a pretty simplistic mentality, though, of not wanting to try to over engineer anything from our end.
Sure.
We were really excited for the whole tour. India and England, huge rivals, and the Ashes series that we'd had in the first series. I must admit, I was like, how could that possibly be topped? And I reckon this one's topped it. And certainly in terms of engaging so many emotional stories from everyone, I
Mm.
think that's the thing that's really like elevated this series is that once one person's story pauses, another person's story kind of sets on fire.
It's so interesting, hey, because like this, like you said, this series, this Ashes series specifically, was just full of so many iconic moments. We had BazBall, we had the spirit of the game, we obviously had Gary getting injured as well. When you see a moment like that, or when you are recording a moment like that, what's that first instinct of going down that narrative path? Do you kind of latch on and you go, okay, this is a moment we really need to follow?
There's probably two parts. One, you like absolutely putting it on the whiteboard and going, wow, there's a beat, there's a moment, there's everything else. But there's almost twofold because, and it's interesting then when you get to the editing process, because at the time it's a certain news story, but news changes then of how we can address it in 6 months' time or when you reflect upon it, that instant news cycle is, oh, hang on, we don't need to treat it that way. We can treat it in another way, So that's always really interesting to keep that in mind. But at the same time, when you're presenting it on screen, you can't present it by knowing all the facts in hindsight.
Yeah.
By then injecting, oh yeah, but this was to come and this was to happen. That's why that conversation doesn't stack up. It's like, in the Lord's, change rooms, when everything has happened, the players aren't to know to go, oh, I wonder what this is going to cause and what's the aftermath of this moment. No, we're still got to go out there and play the next session. So we're mindful to go, hey, present it as to what it was without getting sort of too reflective in the moment. But again, sometimes, you can do that as well. So it's certainly interesting. We certainly do know moments as they go, okay, that's going to be something, that's going to be something. Equally, there would have been moments that we probably thought were something that probably fade away in time too.
It's interesting. I think it leads to those moments of spontaneity as well, that sort of highlight or standout moments. Because one of them, and it's probably the hardest I've laughed in something all year, is when Marcus Harris, after the spirit of the game thing, goes, "You made the rules, you fucking idiots." Like that is probably the hardest I've laughed in something in quite a while. I want to get a little bit nerdy technical, I guess, because I'm curious about the process of it. We obviously, you get interviews with the players in that hindsight and getting them to reflect on moments from the series. I'm curious to know, do you show them footage that you filmed in that regard to sort of get a response from them, or is it all raw recollections of their memories of those moments?
It's all raw recollections, and one of the great things is we actually got them quite soon after the series finished, and so it was still pretty fresh. There wasn't any cricket in between, and I think what was really good, especially this time around, was that we went in and it was 80's idea. We kind of built a list of questions that we wanted to put to them that kept it really open about what this whole story is about, and what moments really stood out to them, and made sure that instead of kind of leading the witness,
Mm.
we were really keen on letting their recollections, that kind of first pass of recollections, really dictate the story.
That's awesome. And I feel like it comes down to that rawness as well. When you feel like what their raw emotions are, I feel I'm more invested as an audience member. I'm curious as well from a narrative perspective. Obviously, cricket fans are going to love the show. I love the show, and I tune in every time. But you've also got people who don't understand the game or aren't necessarily cricket fans, and there's an aspect I feel like you probably have to cater to them as well. So how much is the balance when you are then putting all together the whole series of balancing something that is a love letter to cricket fans, but something that's someone who may not know much about the game sort of has an entry point for?
It's a huge challenge, and it's something we are really focused in on, because you might lose on one aspect. You go, we get too crickety and too down in the technical aspects of the game. You're going to lose that, I think, broader audience. But at the same point, if you make it too broad, the cricket aficionados are going to go, oh, hang on, I need a bit more than this. I want to be there. And one of the cases in point was in, when the ball change happens at the Oval, to go, you could spend another 25 minutes and talking about, here's the ICC rules of here's what that means, and that's what this means. But you go, oh, we still are telling a story here. We still are got to move ourselves through. So it's a really fine line. And we actually also make it like pretty important. We've got a couple of editors that aren't absolute cricket, fanatics, which is all really always important for us to good, because you want them to be able to have the feedback to pick you up on equally, I don't know what's going on here. Because one of the limiting factors can be, if you're an absolute cricket fan and a cricket tragic, you almost have this assumed knowledge coming in and go, that's not important, just move on here. Everyone knows that, everyone knows that. Well, if we're not stepping through and hitting all those beats of why Lords is such a revered place to play cricket, that aspect of why the long room changes suddenly doesn't have as much weight and as much hold. So it's really important to set up those beats to go, hey, this is Lords. Just so you know, this is the standing in the game, which makes everything that happens after the Bairstow stumping such a remarkable and unusual occurrence.
So it's so interesting, and I think a big takeaway for me from that, and as someone who understands or loves the game, is how important that crowd reaction is. Where like Lords is one thing, but Edgbaston is another, and we get to see a little bit of the Barmy Army in Edgbaston here. I would just like to know what were some of the highlights of the footage you went through of the Barmy Army in Edgbaston, and was there anything that didn't really have a chance to make it to air that you were like, that would have been pretty funny?
It's not a huge focal point for us. So I think it's more so a case of like there's more. There's always kind of like more than we get to share with everyone. But it's brutal and I suppose we have a snippet of Uzi walking back, from the training grounds in the morning through having to go through the crowd, and it is brutal. Having to walk through that crowd, and even on the training grounds, there's people lining up to go in, and so some guy in my faint memory is some guy in I think he was in like a WrestleMania mask, yelling out like, "I'm going to take you down" or something to someone. It's just constant.
It's even Marnus, when Marnus walks from the training nets all the way through. And it's so off Broadway that he's behind sheds and industrial sort of outposts. And there's still a couple of English guys having a cigarette, and they go, oh, I'm still going to yell out something from here. So it's so unrelenting that it's like, you might think you've got a moment, but you don't.
It's the Barmy Army. They're just brutal. I got to do the Lords tour, but I mistakenly went as an Australian just after the sandpaper scandal, and I was getting haggled by people on the tour, and I don't play for the Australian cricket team. It's just, one of those things. It's one of those things. I'm curious to know, I know you've both done lots of work with editing and producing as well with sports related content for a long time. What were some of the key takeaways from those moments earlier in your career with producing and editing that sort of were formative in coming in and directing the tests itself?
You want to go, Sheldon? I've got one that I subscribe to, is that you just have to keep almost adapting and just being confident, knowing, not to say you don't know what you're doing, but confident in knowing that you just can't go, oh yeah, we can write the story from A, B, C, D, and it's going to finish in F in a beautiful form. Right up until the hours before we're sort of handing over episode 3, we're still tweaking. Does Todd Murphy fit better here within the game, before the game? At what point, and all of those moments to go, it can always change, and just keep leaning into the process that it doesn't have to be locked and set in stone. That And then the hours, there's actually no way through it. It's something like this with the editing hours that you go, this doesn't make sense. I don't know quite where we are. Well, you just have to spend 100 hours working through the edit to actually get to the solve, because you can't jump from hour 2 and then suddenly solve it at hour 8. You've just got to keep working and refining, and then you get there. So I think that is just, you need the hours. There's times where we sit there and we go, I don't know if this is coming together. And then suddenly 3 weeks later, it's like you've just kept chipping away at the stone, and you suddenly go, oh, this is really starting to take shape now. You just can't shortcut that process.
Sure. Sheldon, yourself?
Well, I think that's a huge one, and I think I actually learned it off Aid, was just keep cutting. Was such an important factor. And one of the things that you normally come up against is that people involved in the editing process will say, like, oh, but I don't know how this relates to this or this relates to that. And the term that I always kind of throw around is like, if we were on air tonight, cut it that way. And I think the other thing is just to not be afraid to hit the big scenes first. And say, that's going to be on the telly. So let's start working on it and let it inform some of the smaller scenes that it connects with later on down the track.
That's awesome. Well, whatever you guys are doing, keep doing it, because I bloody love this show. This is a lot of fun. And I have to ask, obviously, we got Australia-India tests later this year in November. Will we see more of the tests in the coming years, the coming months, with this big rivalry between Australia and India?
We hope so. Nothing confirmed at this stage, but we'd love to. It's funny, I wouldn't have thought after, even the early days after doing Series 1, are we going to do Series 2 and 3? So who knows? Would love to. It's been a great experience. We've loved, every moment, been blessed to be a part of it and blessed to be working with the team. And, it's been such a great experience.
Well, that's awesome. I fingers crossed here as a fan as well. So, Adi, Sheldon, I really appreciate you guys taking the time. Like I said, it's rare these two worlds of mine combined, so I'm really happy that they did, and I'm excited to hopefully talk again soon about some more sports stuff. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Good on you, Nick.
That was
Cheers,
great.
guys.